My name is Amir. I'm one of the solution architects working for AWS, but I spend most of my professional life with .NET technologies. I still count myself from the day one. I still count myself as a .NET developer. Today, I would like to talk about the microservice for .NET, Microservice Extractor for .NET, which is a tool actually is being released by AWS, platform independent, free to use. I think it added a great value to the .NET community, and I decided to talk about it. Without further to that, let's go to the agenda. Today, I'm going to talk about how actually the application become monolithic and what we usually do as a part of refactoring process and how this tool can help you through your refactoring process. No one actually starting a day in the morning, Monday morning, says, I want to go and build a monolith application, right? It happened during the time. The way it usually happened is you start with a very small application. It's a prototype, it's a very tiny functionality. Think about as a Visual Studio ASP.NET MVC template, for example. Then what you do, you run that piece of code or piece of simple application, you start building on top of that. And you build as you need, and your application grows. You probably add more dependencies and build as you need. Eventually, it becomes a very big monolithic, which is hard to maintain and hard to manage. At some point, you decide now it's too hard to change, too hard to manage. What can I do for that? I need to do some refactoring, right? You want to do refactoring to simplify your design, or you want to do it extract a piece of code into this separately deployable microservices to go more toward the microservice architecture. You want to put a CI/CD in place. Technically, you want to do it right? You want to do it right from the day one, but if you know that application is going to stay for 10 years or so, probably you will do it the same way. But now you want to break that application into the separate pieces. Now, what you want to do is you want to think about how I'm going to break that application into smaller pieces. What you usually do, you try to find small pieces of that application, usually low-hanging fruits. Then you're going to bring that piece out of that application and deploy it as a separate piece of functionality as a separate microservice. And when you do that, your application is going to break apart. You need to refactor that applications to not using those internal classes and functionality, goes and try to use the service you just deployed, right? Which this one's gonna bring you to the refactoring process. The refactoring process is think about a manual refactoring process. Different people, different companies, they have different methodology of the breaking the monoliths. But generally speaking, you should be able to do some categorization, some process, and split it into some logical steps. And if I want to give a high and holistic view of the steps, or logical steps we are usually taking to break a monolith to a microservice architecture, technically we identify a piece of logic or a piece of code that we want to bring out of the application. And that's usually we start with low-hanging fruits. As an example, going to be, for example, a logging functionality, right? Then you try to group the relevant piece of the independent component within that solution or within that application as a single unit. What you are trying to do here, you are trying to define your service boundary. Then you may need to do some refactoring, right, to make that extraction possible or easier. Eventually, you do your extraction. When you do your extraction, you usually create a separate project or a solution that you move your new functionality into that, then you're going to deploy it as an independent service. Then when you deploy it as an independent service to a new environment and you test it, you're happy with the results, what you're going to do, you're going to come back to your monolith and refactor that to, rather than using the internal components, use the service you just deployed, right? And then the final step, you're going to test and release. And you're going to repeat that process until you break down whole monolithic to the smaller pieces of the microservice architecture. Now let's introduce that tool and see how this tool can help, right? The microservice extractor for .NET, it delivers technically holistic visualization of your application and assists you in code refactoring and extracting the code base into the separate code projects that the individual team and the service owner can develop and build and operate independent of each other. The good things is like it's a free tool. You can go and download it from the AWS website, and you can run it on any Windows environment. If you think, have a look and think back in terms of those logical steps we discussed, if you think about where actually this tool can help you, this tool can help you for identification, for identifying the part you want to extract, helps you with the grouping with the visualization tool it has. You still need to do some refactoring yourself, but it helps you with the extraction and creating a new process, a new service. And also, it also helps you somehow with the refactoring on your original monolith, but it's not, maybe it's not 100%. It's not a bulletproof that does everything for you, but it helps you definitely put you in the right direction. And obviously, the test and release is your responsibility. In terms of the supported environment, it supports .NET Framework 4.7 and 4.8. It doesn't support, if you have like, think about like if you have Razor views or like the complex logic inside HTML, it doesn't support that. It also doesn't support if you have like multiple database interdependencies between those databases through the database layer. But it's mainly focused on the solution and the application layer. Let's go back to the steps we discussed, right? Let's start with identification. The way you can start working as soon as you download that tool, you can start onboarding your application. Technically, the onboarding means you just give the application solution or the project, and you just onboard that application. That application will be analysis by this tool, and that tool gonna find all dependencies, including runtime. If you have a reflection, for example, it's going to identify that. And it allows you to create a group, define your service boundaries, and move those components inside that service boundary, right? And when you reach to that point, for example, you have a group as a service boundary that is ready for you can export that as a separate service. In terms of the preparation, that tool is like, it just released, is still in evolving. There are some limitations in terms of like maybe you need to do some refactoring in terms of async await. If you have like a complex logic inside your constructor, it maybe not work. But before onboarding that application, you need to make sure that application is building successfully. And in terms of the analyze, it gives you a visual representation of everything, all of dependencies happening inside your application. It's a static representation, and also it's analyze your runtime. There is an option for you when you're running your application. It can monitor your runtime, and it gives you all the calls happening between the layers and the class inside your project, which gives you the option to extract and logically group the piece you want and extract it later. Then we go to the extract phase. When you define that boundary, you have the option to extract that as a separate service. When you extract that, you give some configuration, and eventually it generates a separate deployable zero-touch build, the project, new project. It doesn't touch the source code like the source, but it creates a separate service, and they copy all components you selected as a group with across all dependencies as a new project that can be deployed as a new service. And with that, you have to do some refactorings. You can come back to your application. It does also refactorings. It tries to do some refactoring on your behalf and try to call the service, but obviously it's not zero touch. Maybe you need to do some refactoring yourself, or you need to some configuration after deployment to be able to use that remaining piece of the monolithic to talk to your service you just created. And you do repeat that process until you break all of those microservices into different, all of those pieces separate out to the different microservices. And thanks, I'm right at time. And I would really love to hear from you. Actually, I'm going to paste that link in the chat box. If you think it was useful, just let me know. If anything you think I can improve, just let me know, please. I'm going to adjust that for my next presentations. And any question, I'll be hanging around later. We can have a discussion or paste it into the chat. With that, thank you for staying with me. I'm going to pass it to Mark, which is going to talk about like creating real-time serverless collaboration tools.